I'm Dom Nicholls, and this is Ukraine the Latest. Today, as the impact of Monday's huge aerial strikes inside Russia becomes clearer, we report how the British government's policy to allow Ukrainians to stay in the UK is starting to unravel. We talk with the producers of a new film showing how one veteran of the war has sought solace in the Carpathian Mountains, and we hear how Germany's right-wing AfD party is complaining that they're being cyberbullied by a pack of cartoon dogs.
Bravery takes you through the most unimaginable hardships to finally reward you with victory.
The first duty of my government is security and defence, to make clear our unshakable support of NATO and with our allies towards Ukraine.
Kyiv stands strong.
Nobody's going to break us. We're strong. We're Ukrainians.
It's Wednesday, the 15th of January, 2 years and 320 days since the full-scale invasion began. And today, I'm joined by the Telegraph's executive editor for audio, Francis Dearnley, the Telegraph's political reporter, Genevieve Holl-Allen, and the founders of Ukrainian Action, a US non-profit organisation supporting Ukraine and co-producers of a new film charting the path of a competitive Ukrainian snowboarder who volunteered to fight in the war. Now, we started to get reports of the battle damage from that series of drone and missile strikes Ukraine launched against military and defence industrial targets inside Russia overnight Monday, Tuesday. The Ukrainian General Staff said today that they had targeted Russian military facilities between 200 and over 1,000 kilometres deep into Russia, in Bryansk Oblast up to the north, Tula Oblast just next to that, a little bit closer to Moscow, but still 500 kilometres north of Kharkiv, and Saratov Oblast, that's 600 kilometres east. Also in Russia's, or the Republic of Tatarstan in Russia, but over 1,000 kilometres away from Ukraine. Basically, head towards Moscow, turn east, keep going until you almost hit Kazakhstan. That is the Republic of Tatarstan. Now then, what do we know about each of those? So in Saratov, an oil refinery and storage facilities were hit. Now they supply fuel for the nearby Engels 2 airbase, from which the big Tupolev bombers fly to launch cruise missiles into Ukraine. We're told aviation fuel storage tanks and glide bomb and cruise missile warehouses at the base were also hit. Saratov Oblast Governor Roman Brysagin claimed that a Ukrainian drone strike damaged unspecified industrial enterprises in Engels and Saratov city. Then in Bryansk Oblast, the chemical plant in Seltzo, just outside Bryansk city, just a little bit to the northwest, and 100 km north of Ukraine, was hit as well. That plant produces components for the Kh-59 cruise missiles and ammunition for tubed artillery, MLRS, the multiple launch rocket systems, and thermobaric artillery systems. And they also, we're told, repair Russian multiple launch rocket systems there. There were secondary explosions reported at that site, and a Tor and a Buk air defence system destroyed, we are told. Geolocated footage showed drone strikes and explosions in Seltzo, but that didn't stop Bryansk Oblast Governor Alexander Bogomaz saying that Russian air defence had destroyed all the targets. He had to change that line a few hours later and subsequently said that falling missile fragments had damaged civilian property throughout Bryansk Oblast, including in Seltzo. Russia's MOD said that Ukrainian forces had targeted Bryansk Oblast with 6 ATACMS missiles, 6 Storm Shadow missiles and 31 drones. Now, still in Bryansk, and a microelectronics plant in Bryansk city was also hit. That facility was last hit in October 2024. It produces microelectronics for the Pantsir air defence systems and Iskander missiles, radars, other electronic warfare systems and drones as well. Then, heading to the east, Ukraine's General Staff says that the Kazanorgsyntez chemical plant in Kazan in the Republic of Tatarstan was struck and set on fire. Now, that plant makes explosives for ammunition and materials for armoured vehicles, such as the tyres for tanks and armoured personnel carriers. Sounds a bit weird talking about tyres for tanks. They obviously have tracks, as when you look at a tank, that's the kind of bit you see. They have tracks, but that's just the bit that goes on the ground. You then have road wheels that roll over it. It's basically laying down a carpet to spread the weight of the tank over soft ground. That's what tanks are for. That's what the tracks do. So you do need do need wheels, and therefore you need the rubber to go around the edge of the wheel. Although the actual drive train from the engine, the drive goes through the track, not the wheels. All clear at the back? Good. Right, I'll carry on. Now, that report of the damage to that plant was somewhat challenged by the Russian opposition outlet, or reports from the Russian opposition outlet Astra. They said the strike did not hit the Krasnoyarsk plant, but rather a Gazprom LNG, liquefied natural gas depot, 2 kilometres away, which left 3 fuel tanks burning there. So we're not entirely sure, but that's the nature of war. I'm afraid it's the fog of war. Then finally, in Tula Oblast, so up closer to Moscow, sources in the Ukrainian military and SBU, the security service, said a drone strike had started a fire at the Alikinsky chemical plant. Again, that version was slightly challenged by Astra again, who reported that Ukrainian drone debris fell on the Alikinsky chemical plant and a nearby thermal power plant, and also that the Tula Shemet metallurgical enterprise, that last one being crucial for Russia's steel industry. Now, Tula Oblast Governor Dmitry Melyev said Russian forces had shot down 16 drones over the oblast on Monday and another one yesterday. But as I say, can't verify exactly what's happened because there are conflicting reports. Now, almost certainly in response to that, last night or in the early hours of this morning, Russia launched a large-scale missile attack against Ukraine, launching Kh-101, Kh-22 and Caliber cruise missiles amongst the mix. Ukraine's Air Force issued a nationwide aerial alert this morning following warnings that a group of Tu-95 MS strategic bombers had taken flight from Russia's Olyena airfield up in Murmansk. So that's about 1,500 kilometers north of Ukraine, right at the top of Russia. And concurrently, ballistic missiles were fired from Belgorod Oblast. Now, all those targets, the Russian targets, seem, as has been the pattern in recent months, seem to have been Ukraine's energy infrastructure. There were explosions reported in Kharkiv, Khmelnytsky, Ivano-Frankivsk Oblast and Lviv. No casualty reports yet. President Zelensky spoke on Telegram. He said it's the middle of winter and the target for the Russians remains the same, our energy sector. More than 40 missiles were involved in this strike, including ballistic missiles. At least 30 were destroyed. There were more than 70 Russian attack drones overnight. Now, the all clear was given just after 8 a.m. this morning, but of note, Poland scrambled fighter jets because of the Russian missile threat right over in the west of Ukraine. That comes from the Polish Operational Command. And Ukraine's state grid operator, Ukrenergo, imposed emergency blackouts as a preventative measure. They've been doing that quite a lot. That last comes from Energy Minister Herman Halushenko, reporting there from the Kyiv Indy, a lot of that. So another busy night. Elsewhere, what else is happening? A couple more for me. NATO's highest military authority, the Military Committee, is meeting today. The Chiefs of Defence format, so not the political side, but the Chiefs of Defence meeting in NATO headquarters today in Brussels. All we were told beforehand, and as you'd expect, basically, the meeting is going to focus on further strengthening deterrence and defence of the alliance, strengthening NATO's partnerships around the world, as well as supporting Ukraine. But we'll get a more fulsome readout as the day goes on. Last one for me. Germany has provided a new military aid package for Ukraine. Somebody in Kyiv said, "We are grateful to our German friends for their leadership and steadfast support of our soldiers." This package, so here we go. It was announced. I saw it from the Ukrainian MOD on Twitter. 2 linked tweets. The first one said the package includes 20 MRAPs, so that's mine-resistant, armour-protected vehicles. So 20 MRAPs, ammunition for Leopard 1 tanks, 14,000 rounds of 155mm artillery ammunition, 19,000 rounds of 122mm ammunition, 11,000 rounds for 120mm mortars, and over 700 drones of strike and recce variants, and a lot of other military equipment, including a lot of medical stuff. Now, that was in the first tweet. Then the second linked tweet, said another 227 MRAPs were going. Now, that's a huge number. I'm not sure if that was a typo because it's such a big number, but also why say 20 MRAPs in the first tweet and then 227 in the second? So bit of confusion. Maybe 227 is the total, in which case somebody needs to work out what they're doing on Twitter before pressing send. Might have been a bit of an ND on the old social media. Anyway, the second tweet said 227 MRAPs, 18 155mm howitzers, 5 Marder IFV, infantry fighting vehicle, and 9 Boxer IFV. Marder, fairly old, Boxer fairly new, but still very good infantry fighting vehicles. The point is, though, those are big-ticket items. Howitzers, Marders, Boxers, and 227 MRAPs. I don't know why that was put out just as a secondary tweet. I think there may have been a bit of a comms snafu there, so I'll keep an eye on that. But those numbers don't really make sense. Hopefully there'll be a bit more clarity through the day, either from Ukraine or Germany. Anyway, that's the military update. Francis, let's turn to you now, if we may. A few days before, well, I feel there's a bit of a sort of night before Christmas feel, isn't there, about politics at the moment? But what have you been looking at?
Well, thanks, Dom. We are now, as you say, a mere 5 days away from the inauguration of President Trump. So it really is the last chance saloon for the Biden administration to put in place its final actions before it hands over the reins. That $330 billion figure of frozen Russian assets has been one of the most talked about topics in 2025 so far. And it's interesting to hear that the Democrats are reportedly urging European partners to support the transfer of those frozen Russian central bank assets to a deposit account from which withdrawals would only be allowed as part of a future peace deal in order to have leverage in negotiations with Moscow. CNN has this story citing anonymous administration officials. The strategy reportedly aims to pressure Moscow by signalling the funds could only be reclaimed through successful talks with Ukraine. As the source says, if you want to get this money, you will have to negotiate. Now, as listeners will know, many experts following the financial side of this war consider those funds and others like it as perhaps the key in terms of financial leverage over Moscow, especially if, as President Zelensky is pushing for, those assets were given to Ukraine to specifically purchase Western weapons, especially from the United States. That was the offer allegedly made by President Zelensky to President Trump. But as we've discussed many times, the idea of allowing those funds to be given away has concerned many European countries, including the Germans, who are afraid of what it will mean for their own state assets in Russia, worrying that it will set a precedent for countries to seize and spend funds from others' businesses and indeed other countries' assets just generally located in other places. To that, I would personally reply that if Russia felt it needed to do that, I have no doubt it would do so regardless of what Western countries do with their investments. But by the by, it is a concern for many countries, hence why I don't think it's happened before now. But it seems that conversation is moving forward at the incentive of the outgoing Biden administration. We'll continue to monitor it. But staying in the US, after more than 4 hours, the Senate Armed Services Committee last night concluded its confirmation hearing for Pete Hegseth, Trump's nominee as Defense Secretary. Now, he is, of course, considered one of the most controversial potential appointments were it to pass Congress. He was a political commentator for Fox News since 2014 and a former Army National Guard officer, leading many to argue that he was not qualified for a role that usually goes to very distinguished figures in the defence establishment. Since his hat was thrown into the ring, there have been further allegations that have surfaced accusing him of sexual misconduct, infidelity, and a history of heavy drinking. Democrats pledged to block his appointment, no surprises there, but by the end of his initial confirmation hearing yesterday, crucially, Republican members on the committee showed no obvious intent to oppose his confirmation, as had been potentially speculated. Especially, it would appear that the mood shifted after Hegseth retracted earlier comments criticising the role of women in military combat. Now, for some, he is perhaps most pivotally a loyal servant of Trump, and therefore his own views on foreign policy matters will be secondary to what the president asks of him if he is appointed. Nevertheless, I think it is noteworthy that during his opening speech, he refrained from expressing his views on the war in Ukraine, only sharing his opinion on it when prompted by one of the senators. There, he did seem to push back, consciously or not, against J.D. Vance's comments that I quoted yesterday, with Hegseth saying, "We know who the aggressor is. We know who the good guy is. We'd like to see it as advantageous for the Ukrainians as possible." Now, I should add that there are all sorts of rumours swirling around behind the scenes at the moment, that whatever the public statements, the new administration is serious about this idea of Ukraine wielding considerable leverage over the Russians in negotiations, learning from the errors of the Democrats in the war. We only have words to go on at the moment, not deeds, but we won't have long to wait. I just thought I would mention that here because there is, of course, a lot of pessimism around at the moment, but there are also suggestions behind the scenes that things may not go in that direction, at least not initially. Turning to Kyiv's allies to conclude, it's very important we continue to monitor the Baltic states and countries like Poland very closely, as it seems they will be the nations most in favour of robust security guarantees for an end to the war when it comes. I should say that as a tangent, for those interested in what a boots-on-the-ground settlement might look like, if you missed it, do check out our in-depth discussion yesterday and Joe Barnes' article that we'll link to in the show notes. Lots of you have written in on this subject. Thank you very much. And suffice to say, we will be returning to it. It was just impossible to be comprehensive in one single episode. And so lots of key questions were raised there, and there will be many more to discuss in due course. But on Poland specifically, an interesting story today is that President Zelensky has gone to meet with Prime Minister Donald Tusk after a breakthrough, that's their words, agreement was reached between the two countries in a long-running dispute over World War II exhumations. It stems from the Volyn massacres, which were a series of ethnic cleansing operations carried out by the Ukrainian insurgent army, who were Nazi collaborators against Polish civilians in Nazi-occupied territory in the country during the Second World War. I think it took place around 1943-44, if I remember correctly. The massacres prompted retaliatory violence by Polish self-defense units and the Polish underground, and both sides have called for decades for an acknowledgement by the other of the responsibilities for the atrocities. What's changed now is that apparently a joint decision has been made to exhume the first victims of the massacre as part of a closer alliance forging between Poland and Ukraine. Tusk put it pretty simply in December. He said history certainly cannot divide us, and suggested that there would be moves on this and other issues. We'll see what, if anything, comes out of the meeting between the two leaders, but watch Poland, watch Estonia, watch Sweden, watch Latvia very closely over the coming weeks. They're going to be really pivotal as we move into what could be a negotiations phase, albeit one that, as listeners will know, in my view, is unlikely to succeed initially and perhaps even at all in the coming months. But let's end with the latest from Moscow's allies. We discussed the Collective Security Treaty Organization yesterday in the context of any future peace deal, and said Armenia was a member in the process of leaving that alliance. Well, breaking news in another blow to that organization of post-Soviet states closer to the Kremlin. In one of his final acts in office, US Secretary of State Antony Blinken and the Armenian Foreign Minister signed a Strategic Partnership Commission charter between the two countries in Washington yesterday, a clear statement of intent by the Armenians that they do wish to move closer to the Western orbit, regardless of what's going on in DC at the moment. Now, there is some evidence moving further away that the Slovak population are becoming too increasingly unhappy with their Prime Minister Robert Fico, with moves afoot by opposition parties to force a vote of no confidence in his leadership. The opposition parties, including Progressive Slovakia, Freedom and Solidarity, the Christian Democratic Movement and factions from the Slovak National Party, accuse Fico of failing to manage the country effectively. They've highlighted issues in healthcare, in inflation and, perhaps most pivotally, foreign policy orientation. The opposition parties warn they will not allow Fico to shift Slovakia's alignment towards the east, asserting that he lacks the mandate to do so. Now, it's too early to say how successful they'll be in all of this, but I will end by reading out a message from a listener on this subject who expresses that sentiment. And thank you for writing in, Ivana. She says, I'm a keen listener of the podcast and have not missed an episode. I was born in Slovakia, but I'm currently living in New Brunswick, Canada, where I usually listen from. My grandparents were Holocaust survivors. They also remember the Russian invasions of 1968, and I was in high school during the Velvet Revolution. I remember the statue of Lenin being toppled in my hometown. I was in the crowd chanting. I remember being in Prague during the demonstrations, and I recall with perfect clarity the day the communist president stepped down. I cannot believe that Slovakia's citizens are in the streets again, protesting against Fico, his visit to Moscow, his current stance on Ukraine, and his eastward policies. We, as a nation, should be ashamed of his actions, and any decent Slovak citizen is in the streets demonstrating against these opinions. He has betrayed us as a leader and has sold his soul and the rest of Slovakia, which leaves many of us feeling sick to our stomachs. His actions, his visit to Moscow, his lavish vacation, and his words to his own people as they show discontent with his actions have made a mockery of my home country. His name to me is synonymous with betrayal and deceit. I am not surprised that Polish authorities refused to allow his flight to cross their airspace. I would have done the same thing. Many other Slovak nationals are writing in with the same sentiments, from Italy, from Japan, and from Mexico. I wanted to share this with you because I trust your reporting. I love my country, I still have family there, and love returning home every year. We deserve better. I and most citizens want to be on the right side of history and speak up against Fico. Thank you for reading my letter. Well, thank you, Ivana, and thank you to everybody who writes in from Eastern Europe and offers your perspective. One of the things I most enjoyed towards the end of last year was hearing your memories of the Western radio that travelled into Eastern Europe, Radio Liberty, for instance. And it was just so fascinating hearing memories from the Cold War and how important that was. So we love to hear from you. But Dom, that's where we are with the latest political update as of 1:20 London time.
Thank you, Francis. Now, delighted to welcome back to the podcast, Genevieve. Been a little while, but you're back now, and we are delighted for that. You've been looking at a really interesting story. It started off so well. The British government's policy towards Ukrainians here, that have come here, sorting out the visa scheme, that then went very well, but it's now the wheels seem to be coming off slightly. Is that fair? What have you been looking at, Genevieve? Welcome back.
So yes, when Ukrainian refugees started to come to Britain after the war started, they were issued with 3-year visas to remain in the country. And so the very first of those will be expiring in the end of February, March sort of time. And to resolve this, the government in November announced the Ukraine Permission Extension Scheme, which will allow Ukrainians already here to extend their stay for a further 18 months, which was welcome. But I've been told that for many people, this system just isn't working because Ukrainian refugees cannot renew their visa until a month before it runs out, which is causing huge disruption to jobs. Ukrainian refugees are saying that permanent contracts are being rescinded and they're not being offered certain job opportunities that they might have received because officially their right to work is expiring within the next 6 months, when actually they will in reality be able to stay for another year and a half.
Okay, so it sounds as if they've identified the problem and are trying to do something about it. What chance do you think that they will get something done in time? And have employers taken this sort of goodwill from the government and said, well, okay, we'll offer you jobs, we'll keep the contracts going? And what happens in other countries, by the way?
Well, the problem is the employers aren't doing this. The reason that I decided to report on this is that Opora, which is a charity that runs an online information portal for Ukrainians staying in Britain, has found that already 15% of refugees have had their employment status put in jeopardy by the UPE system, the Ukraine Permission Extension Scheme system. So that's as many as 20,000 of the Ukrainian refugees who have arrived in the UK since March 2022. And that's only realistically going to get more difficult as more and more visas approach expiry and need to be renewed. And we've got some case studies that I've received. For example, a woman called Yana, who's 33. She has a permanent contract, or had a permanent contract for a teaching position in a London college, but it was annulled because of her uncertain visa status. She told us that she secured a permanent contract, but it was annulled after 2 months due to her visa officially expiring in June 2025. But she will be able to stay for longer than that. And another 49-year-old refugee based in London who wished to remain anonymous said that their employer had refused to extend their employment contract, which is set to expire this month because of this system. And as another small issue, not small actually, but it's being reported less at the moment, but it may well grow, it's already causing some refugees problems with private rental contracts as well, because they don't have the proof that they will be able to stay in the country. And it appears that in Britain there is a much narrower window for Ukrainian refugees to renew their visa than in other countries. So at the EU, they enacted what they call a temporary protection mechanism for Ukrainian refugees shortly after the war started, which gives the refugees the right to reside and work in EU countries. And for the 4.47 million now across the EU, they automatically had their temporary protection extended until March 2026 back in June. And in the US, Ukrainian citizens were told in February last year that they could apply for a parole so as to extend their right to stay, and they could do so up to 6 months before their current period expired. So in comparison, the British government has given refugees a very narrow window to reapply, but it is worth saying that this is in line with most immigration schemes. I mean, there's a general consensus that the UK has done a lot to support Ukraine, and the extension on the Ukraine Permission Extension Scheme was welcomed pretty universally. But there have been calls just to extend how long Ukrainians have to apply for this extension with the Home Office. I spoke to the managing director of Opora, the charity that has been supporting Ukrainian refugees, and he said that the current situation is creating a bureaucratically enforced uncertainty, and it is forcing Ukrainians into settling for short-term and substandard solutions. I've also spoken to Alex Sobel, who is a Labour MP, and he's the head of the all-party parliamentary group on Ukraine. And he said that he's had several discussions with the Home Office about this. And he says that what needs to be done really is that the Department for Business and Trade needs to communicate with employers better and get in touch with big groups like the Federation for Small Businesses and the Confederation of British Industry so that they are aware that Ukrainians will be able to continue to have the right to work in most cases until autumn 2026 and beyond. He also pointed out that it is in Britain's interest to sort this out. Ukrainians are filling jobs in sectors, especially where there are worker shortages, such as agriculture and hospitality. And it's in Britain's interest to be able to keep supporting Ukrainians to have jobs and have stable accommodation and support themselves for as long as they need it.
Yeah, and I guess it must be affecting kids at school and all sorts. We do seem to get ourselves in these kind of pickles in this country. Now, I mean, you mentioned the chap there from the APPG, the all-party parliamentary group on Ukraine. Now, APPGs are, there are loads. They're sort of, well, you know them better than me. They're kind of anybody that has a good idea or wants to talk about something can set up an APPG, and it's a way of getting a message into Parliament. However, in my experience, they have been mostly useless. They're just there to allow the people who feel strongly about a cause to feel like they are doing something. I can't really think of any APPG I've seen to affect meaningful change. So it's great that he's speaking to the Home Office, but I just wonder if that will actually do anything. However, having said all of that, maybe given the importance of Ukraine in British politics right now, this one might have a bit more heft. Genevieve, you work in our parliamentary lobby team, so you're based in the Palace of Westminster, facing the white heat of politics every day, much more so than us here in the newsroom. What's your view of APPGs, and do you think this one will actually have any meaningful impact and influence in the Home Office?
I think you're absolutely right about APPGs. As you say, there are lots and lots of them, and they are groupings of MPs who have a particular interest in a particular subject. And if they don't necessarily have any weight behind them, if they're backbenchers, for example, who's to say whether they're going to be heeded or not? But it is a useful way if you are needing help and you want somebody in Parliament to know about it. If you see an MP is a member of a particular APPG and it's relevant to what you're asking, then you can get your concerns to them and they will try their best to help you. I think that there is a chance. It's difficult. I mean, the government has said to me that it recognises the importance of certainty and security for Ukrainians and their families, and that they continue to engage with key stakeholders to ensure that landlords and employers are fully informed. I mean, the message has been, it's been the same message from Labour and the Conservatives after the general election. It's rare that there is such consensus on a political issue in this country, but Ukraine and support for Ukraine is something that Sir Keir Starmer has said that he continues to champion, and that it is an ironclad thing. And I think that there is a chance that the government will move on this. But as I say, it is in line with other immigration schemes. So the government may just say, look, it's the way that we do things. We have extended it and we'll just have to get more information out there. But information to companies themselves will be hugely helpful, I think. And that is what a lot of Ukrainians are seeking.
Lovely. Thanks, Genevieve. Great story. We will track that one with great interest. Obviously, Sir Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, he said he's going to Ukraine soon. Some might say about blooming time, but he's off there soon. So hopefully there'll be some questions around this visa scheme during his trip, or they'll be put to him. Hopefully there'll be a solution. Hopefully we'll have some more certainty, something of longer term than this is currently on offer. But thank you so much, Genevieve. She's had to dash off. She's gone already. Genevieve's had to dash off because she's got to get back up to the Palace of Westminster and carry on the other side of the work. So she won't be around for final thoughts. But please do let us know your experiences. If you are here, any Ukrainian citizens who are here going through this rigmarole, please let us know your lived experience. We would like to highlight these issues. We'll do what we can from where we can with what we've got. So please do let us know your experiences if you're able and if you wish to. Now, delighted to welcome back to the pod Natasha and Jeff from Ukrainian Action. As I said at the start, it's a US non-profit organisation, humanitarian in nature. Primarily, up to now, our discussions before have been around the supply of humanitarian aid. However, I'd like to touch on that again, if I may, guys, just to remind us who you are and what you've been up to. I'd like to talk about the Heroes Rehabilitation Programme, and I'd like to talk about the film that you have co-produced about a professional snowboarder, Ukrainian snowboarder, who volunteered for the war, fought, was injured, and has been, well, the journey afterwards. I won't steal any more of your sandwiches. I'd love to hear the story from you. But Natasha and Jeff, welcome back to the pod. Could you just, as a starter, please reintroduce Ukrainian Action and then sort of briefly outline the Heroes Rehabilitation Programme? Welcome back, guys.
Thank you very much, Dom, for having us back on. So Ukrainian Action was founded in February of 2022, and we've been organizing humanitarian aid convoys from the UK to Ukraine an average of every 2 weeks since then. We've organized 67 convoys in 31 months. We've delivered 340 vehicles and hundreds of pallets of aid delivered and donated to local charities in Ukraine. In fact, our mission 68 departs from the UK this weekend. I founded Ukrainian Action with my Ukrainian wife to help my personal friends from my time as a Peace Corps volunteer in Ukraine in the early 2000s. These are normal guys who became soldiers overnight effectively. And so we began sending aid to them and to other victims of this war. And then these friends became wounded veterans overnight. One friend of mine in particular went right back to work within days of exiting his service. And a month later, when I spoke to him, he told me he regretted this decision, of course. He was having trouble adapting, and he should have taken time to decompress and work on reintegrating into society. And so we launched our rehabilitation program last winter in February 23. Called Ukrainian Action Heroes. It is a program that is the only one of its kind in Ukraine. It brings injured veterans to a ski mountain in the Carpathian Mountains for 10 days, where we teach them to ski and to snowboard. We provide psychological support, such as daily group and individual therapy sessions, and we introduce them to self-help tools and to mindfulness activities, all of which are very new for most of these guys. Things like yoga, meditation, and sauna and cold plunge. We have a fantastic location on a rural ski mountain. It's not a resort by any means. It's more like a hillside village, just under 2,000 meters. There's horses and cows roaming the terrain. Thick pine forests, but enough chairlifts and terrain to access pretty decent skiing. Our season, the ski season in Ukraine actually began in early December. I'll be heading over there in a few weeks, and our program will recommence and will run through February and March of this year.
Brilliant. Thank you. That sounds, all bar the cold plunge. That sounds amazing. Thank you for that. Now, moving on from there, the film that you've co-produced tells us the story of a veteran who's gone through the program or is going through the program. Is that correct?
The veteran is a friend of a friend. He was one of the inspirations for our program. He was a Ukrainian snowboarder, competitive snowboarder, who, like many Ukrainian men, like many Ukrainian heroes, volunteered to fight. He went to some of the most notorious battles, including Bakhmut. He was at the front lines for, I think it was almost 9 months. And like many heroic Ukrainian men and women, he suffered physical and mental trauma in battle. And he left service. He returned home to the Carpathian Mountains to recover. And the film is a short documentary which tracks his story. And really, Dom, the film is not just about Taras. It's about all these million Ukrainian men and women who have similar stories. And so we're very happy to be premiering this film in London in a couple of weeks. It was accepted into a number of film festivals in the US and Canada, and was actually a finalist in the Banff Mountain Film Festival, which we were quite excited about because it will raise more awareness about the plight of these veterans and the need to provide care for them, which we are trying to do with our rehabilitation program.
Yeah, thanks. I'll ask more about the film just in a moment. But firstly, the sector, the veteran sector. So we have a slightly, I wouldn't say difficult relationship in this country between the Ministry of Defence and veterans. It springs from the start point that the Ministry of Defence is there to face the enemy and deliver death and destruction, and actually caring for the people who have been harmed through that cause has always been a secondary concern, if it's even that far up the agenda. So we've relied very heavily on the private sector here and charities and what have you to look after veterans. I know the last government under the new Office of Veterans Affairs and the new government carrying on that work are trying to get some sort of coherence to that, not to lean into the charity sector too much, but just try and draw the threads together to prevent duplication and make sure the best help can be delivered to the most amount of people as efficiently as possible. What is the situation in Ukraine at the moment? How was it hard for you when you started this side of Ukrainian Action's work? Was it difficult to try and plug into the care and rehabilitation for veterans? Are there mechanisms readily available, or were you absolutely starting from a blank piece of paper?
I think Ukraine as a country has been, learning as it's been doing, most recently since the full-scale invasion, with regard to the treatment of veterans and the care it provides for them and the recognition in society. We have actually collaborated with the Ministry of Veteran Affairs. They endorse our program and they provide details of our program to veterans. So we're using that channel to get word out about our program. We actually have also collaborated with the Ukrainian Ski Federation, who has assisted us to identify a new, more accessible location for the expansion of our program, actually, and has helped us to defray the costs of lift tickets and instruction. Our own experience is one of looking at the model that has existed in the UK and in the US, where there are programs that are focused on getting veterans involved in sports such as skiing that have empirical evidence in improving mood, reducing anxiety, amongst other effects, specifically for PTSD. And, I expected the program to be successful given Ukraine's natural endowments, the skiing infrastructure available in the Carpathians, and also Ukrainian sort of natural orientation towards nature and natural healing. Also, the cost profile for skiing in Ukraine is incredibly attractive. There have been some challenges. One variable that was hard to measure was veterans' interest to talk to psychologists. Our program is half recreational sport therapy and half psychological therapy, if you will. And until the full-scale invasion, the concept of mental health and talking to psychologists was not regularly done or talked about in Ukraine. It has really accelerated that through a number of other brilliant programs in the country. We sought to kind of address that issue in a couple of ways. One way was we brought in military chaplains to our program. So these are military men who are also priests. And Ukrainians, particularly Ukrainian men, have a much longer history speaking to priests than to psychologists. The other way was to find psychologists with more of an identifiable background. We were very lucky to find a wounded veteran who is an experienced psychologist. So he's been brilliant. We have another psychologist who has also had his own recovery from a serious head trauma. So these guys can relate to the veterans who come to our program. The other factor really is time. Ukrainians can be reasonably closed to strangers, but after a few days of skiing together, of sitting and sweating in the sauna together, the guys start to talk and tell stories of their experience, and you can physically see them relaxing within a few days of our program, which is incredible to see. Not to mention how they get on with skiing itself. I mean, we have guys who have never been in the mountains before. They've never skied, and they come to our program. Some of them riddled with shrapnel. God knows what they've seen. We had 2 guys who were in Russian captivity, and these guys, they're learning to ski, and within a week, they're skiing, they're laughing, they're smiling, and I hope that they're thinking about a brighter future than maybe they were before they came to our program.
Yeah, it's amazing, Jeff, listening to what you're saying there, and we'll talk after the episode, but it really rings through to me that a lot of what you're saying and describing is echoed in the work of the Boulder Crest Foundation in the US. Now, these are the guys who they've set up 2 sites, one in Arizona, one in Virginia, about 40 minutes outside Washington, just up the Appalachian Trail up there. I visited them when we took the pod over there, September 2023. I went and stayed with when I visited the Boulder Crest up there, Boulder Crest guys. I was staying in the Bear's Den, you may remember, although they wouldn't let me expense bear repellent here at the Telegraph. That was shameless. But no, a lot of what you're saying, and we'll chat afterwards, but I hope you're in touch with these guys. If not, we should do so, because I think a lot of these programs, the mental as much as the physical rehabilitation, and just giving people space and doing something different and allowing that room for people to talk, it absolutely is in line with what they're doing. I think there'd be a lot of crossover there worth exploring. You talk about the film. So when is the film out? Where will it be out? How do people get to see it?
Thanks, Dom. So, the London premiere of the film Taras, co-produced by Ukrainian Action and the legendary ski film company Matchstick Productions, will be on the 29th of January in central London. We have set aside, I think it's about 10 tickets for Telegraph podcast listeners. So if any listeners would like to attend on the 29th of January from 6:30 p.m., you can email events@ukrainianaction.com or go to our website, ukrainianaction.com, to the page Taras Film and register for tickets. I should also mention, of course, that we are grateful to have you, Dom, joining the film premiere to moderate a Q&A after the film with myself and a special guest from the Ukrainian Embassy. I also had Francis picked for a bit of a film premiere guy, so hopefully he'll make it as well, but we'll see. And for those listeners who cannot attend, obviously, we're grateful for any support that we do receive. So you're welcome to donate to our program at ukrainianaction.com. Dom, just to go back to your point and your kind recommendation to contact with this group in the U.S., that is much appreciated. We do collaborate with experts who have been in this field in the U.S. and the U.K. In fact, one of the I guess more unique aspects of our program, which we adopted last summer, was to include the spouses of veterans in our program as well, which is practiced elsewhere. Since recovery is all about socialization, communication, and interaction with family and society, it makes sense to include spouses. I also want to mention that this winter we'll be expanding our program to include adaptive skiing for veterans with amputations, which is a segment in Ukraine which is unfortunately growing at a very rapid rate. We are in fact working with Ukraine's Invictus ski and snowboard team to help them to get certified as instructors when they're over in Canada next month competing, so that they can return to our program to be instructors for veterans who come to the program with amputations. And to that extent, we're interested to also bring adaptive ski instructors to Ukraine from the US, from Europe. And on that note, we've received a lot of donated equipment, but we are in the need of snowboards, boots, gloves, goggles, and helmets. Again, for any listeners who do want to help support veterans in Ukraine.
Thanks, Jeff. I mean, that does sound fascinating. From hearing you speak there, getting involved in Invictus and what have you, that is an absolute avenue. I do hope that I know the Ukrainian government got quite a lot to think about at the moment, but if they're giving any thought at all to pulling society together through sport after this war, then that is something that can absolutely galvanise the public and be a real cause for cause for celebration in the future, I should say. Okay, I'm going to start drawing to a halt here. Jeff, thanks so much for your words there. We'll put links in the episode notes today to your website. And yeah, folks, 29th of this month, if you want to come to the premiere, then apply for your tickets. I'll be moderating the Q&A. You made a list of who you wanted to ask to moderate the Q&A. Francis, it's a brutal pruning process, but I'm afraid you didn't make the grade, so I got the job. There we are, so the 29th. Let's go to final thoughts, if we may. I'm going to start. I am occasionally asked what NAFO is, NAFO, North Atlantic Fellas Organisation, what NAFO is and why I describe myself in my Twitter bio as a fella. So a very quick update. NAFO is an online group that fights Russian propaganda, using as a weapon, fighting with nonsense. There is no point trying to use logic or facts to work against Russian officials or trolls, because they ignore all that. But Russian trolls, and in fact most trolls in my experience, can't do irony. So NAFO fights back with nonsense, challenging online lies, generally, making an arse of themselves, getting up the noses of Russian officials. And the fellas, what the term fella refers to, it's the gender irrelevant character based on the Japanese hunting dogs, the Shiba Inu. I mean, there's a lot more. It all sounds very confusing, and that's part of the point. But just search NAFO, Google NAFO, find out how to get your own bespoke fella, how you can actually get the people and get them to design your own fella. That's what I did. I just, asked them to. I said I was a journalist, former helicopter pilot. My favourite pistol was a Sig 229. So can I have a little fella? And they did. Anyway, why do I raise it today? Germany's Kremlin-friendly, should we say, Alternative for Deutschland political party has complained to the government, the German government, about NAFO, accusing it of cyberbullying. So in a parliamentary question, the AfD asked the government in Berlin whether it is aware of, quote, defamatory activities and cyberbullying by NAFO representatives, unquote, and what impact that might be having on freedom of opinion in Germany. I thought this was hilarious because, poor old Putin-friendly AfD, extreme right political party, being cyberbullied by a load of, checks notes, cartoon dogs. Brilliant. You couldn't make it up. Oh, yeah, and in case you're wondering, NAFO expansion is non-negotiable. Tickets are still available for the post-victory Crimea beach party, and I can exclusively reveal that NAFO funding does indeed come from the CI6. Anyway, Francis, what's your final thoughts, please?
Vikings. I want to end today with Vikings. A little bit more of a cheerful story than a lot we've had of late, but it's a historical one. And listeners may recall, we got very excited about Anglo-Saxons last year with David, and this story resurrected some memories from that for me, and that's why I thought I would talk about it today. So a new study by researchers has reignited a debate over 8 medieval pyrophyllite discs that were found by archaeologists in Ukraine. So these discs date from the 12th and 13th century and have long baffled archaeologists, this is a direct quote from the article, with their complex design and unknown purpose, a bit like some of Dom's fashion choices. But the new research now suggests that these stone objects might have been solar compasses, so a rather, of course, sophisticated navigational instrument attributed to the Viking seafarers of that area. So pyrophyllite is a soft mineral found in large quantities in Ukraine, particularly settlements around Kyiv and Lubeck. The strange engravings that are on the discs are the main source of the mystery. There's lots of concentric circles and radial lines, and there have been numerous conspiracy theories as well as legit theories concerning their purpose, from calendars, needle sharpeners, jewelry making tools, even just decorations. The material itself is what makes it so good for doing fine work and design, hence why they think it's quite a unique thing from Ukraine, hence all of this interest. But really it all just underscores the possible impact of Scandinavian merchants and navigators who travelled around that part of the world in the medieval period, so around the Baltic Sea and the Black Sea. And I think it all just speaks to the fact that Ukrainian history is much richer than just being a history of its relationship with Russia, something Timothy Snyder talked about a lot, of course, in our interview with him, talked about ancient history and of course medieval history too. It's very interesting in Ukraine. So a lighter story in which to end today, but I'll add a link in the show notes for those who are interested in it.
Lovely. Thank you, Francis. Now then, Jeff, thank you so much for coming back today. Fascinating to talk again. Really looking forward to seeing the film, moderating the Q&A on the 29th. Please do get in touch with your tickets. Would you like to close today's episode with your final thoughts, guys?
Thank you very much. Yeah, I'll just say a few more words about veterans and their importance in Ukraine. In my last meeting with the Ministry of Veteran Affairs a few months ago, they were talking about over 1.3 million veterans in Ukraine. Surely that number is higher now and growing. Estimates are predicting 5 to 8 million veterans and family members in Ukraine by the time the war is over. That is an incredible amount. You know, these veterans are facing serious challenges reintegrating to civilian life, including mental health challenges, bureaucratic challenges, and they also can participate in the workforce in a very meaningful way. I think they're currently estimated around 10% of the country's workforce. That's probably going to continue to grow, and it only underscores the importance of their reintegration into society and the labor market. Obviously, veterans have many desirable skills for employers in the workforce. So there's a huge role for NGOs and civil society to play in veterans rehabilitation. I hope our program is helping to improve the lives of veterans in Ukraine today. I believe that it is. And our film will hopefully continue raising awareness about the plight of veterans, the need to support them. Once again, the film premiere is on the 29th of January. The film is actually being sponsored by a company called Workday, the global software giant. They've been a big supporter of ours. They're actually also sponsoring a corporate convoy next month in February, where they have we have all female volunteers, female employees of the company will be driving from the UK to Ukraine. It's actually going to coincide with Valentine's Day as well, interestingly enough. And we like that story. Our actually logistics team at the border between Poland and Ukraine is already an all-female team, simply because men cannot leave the country. So next month in February, sponsored by Workday, we will have an all-female convoy from the UK all the way to Ukraine, which we're very proud about as well. So I'll close with that. Once again, if you're interested in tickets to the premiere, please email us at events@ukrainianaction.com or go to the website and look for the page Taras Film and register for tickets there. Thank you very much. If you can't attend, you can donate on our website, ukrainianaction.com. Thank you guys very much for having us.
Ukraine the Latest is an original podcast from The Telegraph, created by David Nicholls. To support our work and stay on top of all our Ukraine news, analysis and dispatches from the ground, please subscribe to The Telegraph. You can get your first 3 months for just £1 at www.telegraph.co.uk/Ukraine the Latest. Or sign up to Dispatches, our foreign affairs newsletter, bringing stories from our award-winning foreign correspondents straight to your inbox. You can listen to this conversation live at 1 p.m. London time each weekday on Twitter Spaces. Follow The Telegraph so you don't miss it. To our listeners on YouTube, please note that due to issues beyond our control, there is sometimes a delay between broadcast and upload, so if you want to hear Ukraine the Latest as soon as it's released, do refer to podcast apps. If you appreciated this podcast, please consider following Ukraine the Latest on your preferred podcast app and leave us a review, as it really helps others find the show. Please also share it with those who may not be aware we exist. You can also get in touch directly to ask questions or give comments by emailing ukrainepod@telegraph.co.uk. We do continue to read every message. You can also contact us directly on Twitter. You can find our handles in the description for this episode. As ever, we are especially interested to hear where you are listening from around the world. Ukraine the Latest was today produced by Alexis Adimora. Executive producers are Louisa Wells and David Nicholls.